Welcome to episode 8 of the GAA Performance Podcast. This week is an analysis episode where we'll be looking at the pros and cons of the roving goalkeeper. Derry and Armagh are both in action this weekend for the first time since the Ulster final. That one was decided on a penalty shootout, but it wasn't the heroics of the goalkeepers in that was the main talking point, but rather that Odhran, Lynch and Rafferty between them had almost 100 possessions playing in goal. So we're going to break down the performances of both Rafferty and Odhran Lynch in that Ulster final. We're going to look at the pros and cons of both, but in particular Odhran Lynch, to see exactly why are Derry employing this tactic and how to stop it. We'll also show a few examples of what happens when it goes wrong. So could this become the norm? Goalkeepers roving up the field in all club and county games? Let's have a look and see what the stats are for 2023 in league and championship and see just how many goalkeepers are scoring. If you have any comments or feedback for this analysis episode or any of the episodes so far, be sure to drop a message on any of the social platforms. But for now, let's get started. In terms of pros and cons then, in the Armagh goalkeeper's case, things are pretty straightforward. An inter-county level outfield player who on his injury comeback was positioned in goal, a position he had very little experience in. He gives Armagh a true extra player advantage, but with that comes some basic goalkeeping inadequacies. This is definitely a case of risk-reward. For Derry, however, what Odhran Lynch is doing is a true roving goalkeeper, considering he is an actual out-and-out goalkeeper. So why do teams bring their goalkeeper out the field? We've seen examples and it takes very little imagination to see how it could go badly wrong. But there are three core ways in which it can be a massive advantage for a team in the modern game. First and foremost, a roving goalkeeper gives outfield players a get-out-of-jail card. An isolated outfield player knows they can turn back and recycle to their goalkeeper. You'll see most inter-county teams nowadays, their goalkeeper will be a support option behind the play up to at least the halfway line. Roscommon in the Connacht semi-final against Mayo did this masterfully in terms of maintaining and holding possession of the ball by using their goalkeeper as an extra support player behind the play. In this picture you can see how from a line ball, Odhran Lynch was an option behind the play when all of his players were marked by a press from the Armagh team. The main goal from this strategy is to maintain possession. The next two ways in which Derry used their roving goalkeeper are based on the +1. And what we know from watching Derry so far is they are a team who love to exploit +1 and overlap situations. If Derry can create a +1, even from their own half-back line, they will maintain that advantage all the way up the field to create a score. They do this through creating overlapping runners. They do this also through a lot of their set plays to create pockets of space for that +1 to come into. So the two ways in which Odhran Lynch is involved in this is by firstly making the +1 and secondly being the +1. So how does Odhran Lynch make a +1? Well, he joins the play as a support runner. He receives the ball from a Derry teammate, receives the attention of an Armagh player, and then passes the ball to a free Derry player who is now free because he has come in as an extra man and created a 3v2 or a 4v3. And you'll often find that Derry will turn down the opportunity to take the ball in a general transition, return back to Odhran Lynch to create that +1. Such is the focus that they put on it. But doing this too much also has its problems. I call it going back to go forward, which obviously is slow, can be a little bit predictable. And as you've seen in that Ulster final, they're only starting forward to kick a point from play with Shane McGuigan. Armagh didn't do much better because their only one was Rian O'Neill. Then in terms of being the +1, Odhran Lynch will often join and support a Derry attack. More often than not in this situation, it will be an attack that he hasn't started himself. And when there is already a Derry player in that anchor kind of position, he will then come as the +1, the late runner, and receive the ball in the space which has been made in the 3v2 or the 4v3 in Derry's favour. He'll receive the ball in that position and he'll look to score or create a score, like all of the Derry players do when they're in that +1 position. We scored 2 points already this year. One of them actually came from a kick-out turnover, but the one that he scored against Fermanagh was a perfect example of coming as a late +1 runner. And he tried to do the same thing in the Ulster final where he kicked his wide. But in two other situations in that Ulster final, he came as a +1, he was the +1, and he was isolated and turned over. So this both raises and answers the question of how do you stop this? We'll go into more detail on this in a few minutes, but what I like to call this is a trap on the +1. So first and foremost, Armagh did this very well on a number of occasions, but what the overall goal is to make the goalkeeper the +1 Why? Because the goalkeeper is less of a threat as a free man than an outfield player. So Armagh's two main turnovers on Odhran Lynch were out wide. So if you can have the goalkeeper as the +1 in an isolated position, and you allow him to have enough time to take a play and to feel relaxed and realise that he's the +1. So allow that second of time, but then all Armagh players in that zone come in at once from all different angles and put a massive pressure on the +1 goalkeeper. We've seen the two major turnovers that were had were not Odhran Lynch being dispossessed or having the ball taken off of him. He just panicked, made a really bad decision, won a kick pass over his shoulder blindly, won a really bad hand pass into traffic, because he's a goalkeeper surrounded by outfield players in an isolated position in the middle of the field. Whereas when he is that +1, if a man rushes to him initially, he can easily just give a quick pass. And if he's given enough time, he will look up, he has a big boot on him, and he will give an excellent pass or score from distance. The players need to be close enough to him, and then they need to come in a pack and put extreme pressure on him.
Derry have got so strong and so comfortable in possession that the only time they seem to give the ball away now is when they actually shoot. So when a team does eventually force a turnover and the goalkeeper is out of position, it'll take a risk mindset for a team to kick direct into a forward, first time early, and commit numbers. It'll always be the likes of Kerry and Galway who do go for it. The two traditional kicking teams in Gaelic football. In last year's league clash between Kerry and Monaghan, Rory Beggan was turned over after receiving a poor pass in the middle of the field. Kerry went straight for it with a long kick into Clifford, who finished soccer style. In last year's semi-final between Derry and Galway, Damien Comer was at the end of another long ball in, with Odhran Lynch way out of position.
A look now at Ethan Rafferty's possession map for in-play involvements in the Ulster final. From the second half onwards, he took the game by the scruff of the neck and was one of the outstanding players on the field for his in-play involvements. As you can see here, the majority of his involvements are between the Derry 65 and 45. However, this is where he makes his passes. It's not where he receives the ball. He carried the ball often between 20, 30 or even more yards at pace with intent before then delivering the ball. Often a simple pass, but there were also several line breaks in there. One of those line breaks was for his point, another one was for an assist, and he got within the Derry 45 on 9 occasions. As well as his 2 assists, he gave a great pass that led to another point, and he also gave a tidy pass to Rory Grugan, giving him a mark and an opportunity to win the game late on. He gave one ball away, which was a kick pass for a mark inside, which probably should have went outside of the man. So, for a breakdown of that, he had 4 shots, scored 2 of them, gave 2 assists, he had 6 line breaks, and before that in the Ulster Championship, he'd already assisted 2 points and scored 2 frees. So in total now, so far in the Championship, he scored 4 points, 2 frees, and he's assisted 4 points. Not bad for a goalkeeper. Back to Odhran Lynch then, and a look at his possession map in the Ulster final and his in-play involvements. He did brilliantly to offer support to players all over the field, but as you can see, he gave a lot more of his passes in his own half than Rafferty did. For 47 involvements, to only have 1 shot and 2 line breaks in his own defence tells a lot. It's very few impacts for a lot of possession. That tells the story of a lot of Derry's general play in that game. So is that something for them to improve on? Is that something which just suited the team they were playing against? The reality is, against non-Ulster opposition in a faster paced game, they will not be able to go back to go forward as much as they did in this game. In fairness to Lynch, he'd already assisted 1-2 in the previous Ulster Championship games, the pass for the goal being an absolute beauty, and scored 2 points himself. As you can see from his map, the dispossessions were in isolated positions. 2 out by the in-line, 2 out by the sideline. He also gave 1 ball away with a bad hand pass and gave 1 away with a bad kick pass, which luckily for him hit off the referee and led to a throw ball, which subsequently led to a point, but it could have been worse. He also got the rub of the green with the late decision after claiming a dropped shot, which he did well under several times in the game. He carried the ball along the end line, dropped it under pressure, and then stood over the ball holding 2 Armagh jerseys. The referee subsequently decided to hop the ball and blow the full-time whistle. A complete cop-out. But for Lynch, he definitely wasn't complaining. So a bit of a deeper look now at 2 of those major in-play turnovers. The first one took place along the right wing. As mentioned earlier, Lynch was the +1 here. He received the ball, had enough time to realise he was the +1 and take his play, and then before he knew it, he was surrounded by Armagh jerseys. He'd entered the trap. Over on the left half forward position, a similar thing happened. In an isolated position, he took the ball on, took a play, and by the time he looked up, he was surrounded. As you can see here, he has a pass available to him on his inside right shoulder. And now a look at when he makes a +1. This first example shows how simple it can be when the defender simply
simply runs to Lynch. 3v2, easy hand pass, and a man is in a free position. Here's a brilliant example of Derry doing what they like to do best, creating a +1 early through Lynch and continuing that overlap throughout the phases to finish off with a score. A fisted point, one of 3 they got in that Ulster final. And here again is Lynch in that +1 role, out in space, coming as a late runner out on the right hand side, a space that's been created by the Derry attack, a tactic we've seen them do not for the first time this year. The Armagh management and defence all day long will take him shooting from there. This is still outside of the scoring zone, and when Armagh can afford any amount of pressure on Lynch, it really reduces the odds of him converting. And while that Ulster final clash was fascinating, and more goalkeepers are being expected to help out as a +1 and a recycling option, the reality is that at club and county level, roving goalkeepers are far from the norm. In fact, this year, the only 2 goalkeepers who have scored from play in either league or championship are Odhran, Lynch and Ethan Rafferty. Lynch has 2 points in the Ulster Championship, and Rafferty scored 2 points in the Ulster final, as well as 1-1 from play in the league. In total this year, Rafferty has scored 1-7, which makes him the 3rd top scoring goalkeeper in league and championship. Second on the list is Raymond Gaelic with 13 points, and Mark Jackson tops the list with 21 points. There's been 18 goalkeepers who have scored so far in league and championship, and a goalkeeper has scored in 65 of the games, which is 44%. So in nearly half of games so far in this year's league and championship, a goalkeeper has scored. Yet, again, only 2 goalkeepers have scored from play. And to add to that, it's interesting to look at the league breakdown. 123, with 1-1 of which from play, was scored in Division 1 of the league. Only 1 point free was scored in Division 2 of the league. 25 points were scored in Division 3 and 22 points were scored in Division 4 of the league. In the Ulster Championship, 12 points were scored by goalkeepers, 3 of them frees and 5 of them 45s. In the Connacht Championship, 3 frees were scored by goalkeepers. In the Leinster Championship, 4 frees were scored by Mark Jackson. And in the Munster Championship, 3 frees were scored by goalkeepers. So in case we needed any reminding, we can see clearly there which province is leading the evolution.
So this weekend, what can we expect Ethan Rafferty to score against Westmeath? And what will be the cost at the other end? Odhran Lynch against Monaghan. Will he be outdone by Rory Beggan? And how will Monaghan approach Lynch as the +1? This summer promises to be a huge one in terms of the evolution of the roving goalkeeper. Thanks for listening.